Hi, everyone. This is Tatiana Kolovou, and
Brenda Bailey-Hughes.
we are so excited that you're here with us today. We're discussing communication in high stakes conversations. But the reality is that we are discussing this because our course on the topic of communication foundations was in the top 20 of all global classes. Wait a minute, I want to say that again with a little pizzazz. Our course was in the top 20 of high ranked courses in LinkedIn. So we're really, really excited about that. And hence the little party glasses and the tiara and
I broke out
magic
my
stick
tiara and my wand for
on
such a
Brenda's side. That's
celebration.
right. So as we get started today, we wanted to give an homage to our course and also tell you a little bit about, you can find it as the Global Foundations course on business, on the communication side. But I wanted to share with you one of the things that is really cool about this course and kind of how this live came about. It's easy to have everyday communications with people around you in reports and updates and how's it going. And we call those common situations in the course. But we also researched and asked a lot of our learners and former students where really they needed help with communication. And what they said was the challenging situations, the high stakes situations. So what we wanted to point out, we wanted to point out that we have situations additional to the ones that we'll talk about here in our live today, and then a toolkit. We're big on toolkits. A toolkit to follow everyone. So if you want to work on this skill, for example, when you have to pitch ideas and you want to get training in that, then there's a toolkit to add to that too. So kind of keep that in mind, and that's the pitch for the course. I would love for you to follow me on LinkedIn. And I also have Brenda's handle here, and you can follow Brenda because she also has her LinkedIn Live. There's one coming up next Monday. Is that right?
With you? No, not with you. You're next month, though. Yes. Monday is with Ray Luther. We're going to talk about self-awareness and how we can coach others to build self-awareness. And then Tatiana's going to be my guest in September to talk about one of our other best-selling courses, which is effective listening.
Great. Our best-selling courses. I'll have to bring the glasses back.
Bring the glasses and the tiara back for sure.
So we have so many people that signed up for the course here today, and I'd love to switch over to the comments. You know, we do this all the time. We're sort of your talk show hosts, and where are you coming in from? So I see Lilani from the UK and Akin from Ontario, and we have Jay from Poland. Yes. I gave Jay a heads up. He asked me, and I told him when this would be so he could make it in time, because it's just about bedtime in Poland right now, probably. But when, as I said, Brenda, high stakes communication, what would you say situations? What creates those? What is it that makes us lose sleep at night, lose our appetite, and just spend so much energy thinking about these?
Well, I think high stakes is in the eye of the beholder, is in the eye of the communicator to some extent. So I know that for me, making a big ask of someone is incredibly intimidating to me. And so that makes it high stakes just because of my anxiety level. Other people, they make requests all the time, but they hate conflict. So as soon as they step into a conversation where people are butting heads, they start to feel that anxiety ramping up. So I think just your own anxiety level around a topic is certainly one of the things that makes it high stakes. But then probably what's on the line, right?
So Brenda, what's in your head, right? What's on your mind?
Yes, what's on your mind can make it high stakes. And maybe even more importantly, because maybe nothing's on our mind when we just wander into a conversation somewhat with some degree of naivete and not recognize what is on the line. That, I think, is maybe a better definition of high stakes communication. When this conversation can affect my career, it can affect my relationships, which can affect my career, when it can affect ongoing teamwork and collaborative efforts, those are high stakes conversations.
Sure. And I think sometimes when it's public, so we talk about context and we'll talk a little bit about the theory, when there's more than just two people, a bigger group, maybe sometimes in a virtual setting, when there is, I think sometimes for me, high stakes conversations have to be had when the person is pretty passive aggressive. They've stopped communicating with you the way they do, and they sort of give you the cold shoulder, or they are quiet, or they're not as friendly. And you think, what now? We have to have that conversation as, are we okay? What's going on? I'd always much rather just the person come to me and say, hey, look, you messed up and I'm upset. I have to pause for a minute. We have Alita from Bulgaria. Love it. My neighbor of Greece. Houston, Sweden, Canada. Of course, we have our friends in India, Chile, and Chicago. David Watkins, great to see you, one of our MBA students. And Mexico, San Jose, California. So thank you so much all for coming in. And we do expect, we have time allotted for all of you to tell us. You will have to maybe be brief, but tell us what your high stakes conversation is and how we can help. Before we do that, because as I mentioned on slides for all of you, we've got to lean in on the theory a little bit, right? In a communication situation, you have a sender, you're probably the sender, and you have the receiver. It could be more than one person, it could be an audience, or the person who is hearing your message. And today, we'll talk about you as the sender, the things you can control, correct? That's the part, and that's the communication. So Brenda, you want to talk a little bit about perceptions and preconceived notions, what we call mental filters? What are they?
Sure. I think it's just important to realize that both you, the sender, and the receiver, or multiple receivers, if this is one to group communication, we are not just blank slates awaiting the message to be imparted to us. Instead, we already all have these preconceived notions, we have assumptions, we have biases, we have triggers that set us off on certain topics or conversational areas. And the more attuned we are to whatever those mental filters are, the more sensitively we can step into these high stakes conversations.
And I'm going to ask you, and I decided to share sort of a conversation or communication that was high stakes and it didn't go well because I didn't take time. I knew what my preconceived notions were, well, I thought, and then I made my own story about what the other people had in their head, and that was not true. So I had not checked those, I had not verified them or looked to see if that was true, and obviously I went a little wrong in this way as well. Of course, then we have what the message is, and also what channel we're going to put the message in. Here, and we talk a little bit about in the newsletter, in the Stronger newsletter, I talked about high stakes. The higher the stakes, it's best if it's face-to-face, but sometimes it's better to take away the face-to-face, the nonverbals, and just go audio and have a phone conversation. Or sometimes we always used to say, write a letter, right? So get your thoughts out however you want to have a little bit more of a three-dimensional conversation where you can have the other person in front of you. But assume that maybe there are options of writing something, of speaking something, or of having something be face-to-face or live face-to-face.
Some interesting research on that you mentioned. Sometimes maybe a telephone call is better. Empathy actually goes up sometimes, especially for people you don't know well, if it's an audio only conversation. It seems so counterintuitive to me, but I've seen multiple studies that point this out. So if you know you're entering into a high stakes conversation where your ability to be very empathetic, or you really need the other person to be able to empathize with you, maybe a voice call is the better option.
Yeah, I know when I have to do a voice call, I listen better, especially when I can sense that the other person is upset at me or upset in general too. Margarita, hold on a second. We'll get to your question in just a bit. I want to finish.
I love her question, by the way. She's got a great scenario for us. Thank you, Margarita.
When you do this, if you don't just send a message, a text, a chat, any kind of one directional on the channel, if there is a feedback from the person receiving the information, hopefully they get to non-verbally speak to you or actually ask you questions, ask you for clarification, or say, you are so out of line, I can't even have this conversation right now. You know you've gone wrong. So there should be, if you want to know if you're on the right track, some opportunity to collect data in that feedback as well.
I think an important thing about the feedback loop is that, let's say you're sharing bad news. That would be an example of a high stakes communication, perhaps. You're giving news to people that they're not going to receive very well. And you want to get some of their feedback, but parts of this bad news decision are a done deal. There's no changing it. And so they start telling you, well, let's change this. We need to do this differently. And you don't have any authority over that. You don't have any recourse to take. It almost sets them up to feel as though, why did you even ask us for feedback if you're not going to pay attention to what we're saying? So be a little bit structured about how you ask for feedback. Maybe say things like, this is the part of this plan that we have no control over, but these 3 pieces we do. So I would love your feedback on these 3 things.
Yeah.
Elicit feedback, but in a controlled parameter way.
Exactly. Feedback specific. I'm trying to understand this, and this, or just even one thing. I've got to share what Jay is saying. I look in the eyes of the receiver in order to understand. He's reading eyes to see if they're capturing the message. And Jay, sometimes it's hard when people look down as they're taking notes, or they're thinking and they're looking up. I'm not very reactive, and in case of questions, I need to completely relax to find the answer. Sometimes it could be distracting for you, Jay, specifically, but I like that you make an effort. Context, we've got stories about context. Do you want to cover that, Brenda?
Well, sure. Context involves in things like the timing of your message, even the location of where you choose to have the conversation, if it's a face-to-face conversation. It's thinking about all the myriad of environmental and personal factors that can affect that conversation.
And I wanted to, I've got one more to show, but our friend Baharak is saying, what establishes high stakes? And we touched upon this a little bit when we started by saying, when there are emotions on the line, when there's conflict, when there is power around an issue, when there's ownership and there's lots of ego, and these difficult or these high stakes conversations, when there's a lot on the line, as we say in America, in the conversation for both parties, or at least for one party. So, Baharak, I hope that makes sense. The final thing I do want to show in this, in the model that we talk about in communication, is external noise, which is not literally someone banging on a drill in the room next door, or it could be, maybe there's a bad place to have a conversation. But it's also the noise in our heads or in the heads of our receivers. And that has a lot to do with timing. Is it the time of the day, the time of the week? Is that right? Is it the time of the quarter? Is there anything else going on that it's best that you don't bring something up now? If you are the sender, you have to consider all of these things, and your timing is critical. I know I had just this Monday morning a very important meeting, and I tried to get in first thing before my receiver's head got too full, before the hard drive got too full too. So before we take Margarita's question, which is really good, and we'll get to that, I thought that Brenda and I would share a situation where we've had a high stakes conversation and we could have done something better, knowing then what we know now, or if we had even paid attention to what we teach, right? What was it? Because sometimes we're the worst. We teach this stuff and then we go ahead and step right into it. And thankfully we have each other and other colleagues that we check in with or practice with, or just at least give us some of their common sense, at least for me. So what was it for you?
Oh, you want me to start with a story? Oh my goodness. Okay, so
context first.
Context is that my a director had retired, and someone needed to fill the role, and that usually happens by other faculty stepping into the role. And so my dean, so this is my big boss, had called me into her office to talk about this. And I'm not 100% sure, but I'm thinking she's probably going to ask me to accept the role. And she did. And I had to tell the superior no, because I did not want this role. So back to Baharak examples, having to tell someone in a position of power no, that's an example of a high stakes communication situation. Now, if I'd been really, so sender, it has to be me, receiver has to be her. There's no flex in the model there. Even timing. I mean, she's called me, the position needs to be filled. It needs to be filled on this time frame. I don't really have a lot of choice on timing, even though that was regrettable, because I knew that she also had all of these other high priority things that she was dealing with, and just kind of wanted to get this checked off the list and moved on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew it was bad timing, but we didn't have a choice on the timing. And I think that's a reality that some of you will have to face.
Yeah.
So then the other components of the message, remember, are things like the model, our channel, no choice. It's going to be a face-to-face meeting. So now I'm kind of down to the things that I have to play with. Our message and feedback are pretty much the only things left for the most part. I so wish I had spent more time strategizing my message. I wish I had carefully thought through. We have a great clip from General Peter Pace, who was a former Joint Chief of Staff, and he was at IU for a while in a guest capacity. And he was speaking to our students one time, and he said, "Before I go into a meeting with the president in the White House, I think through, what am I willing to do? What am I not willing to do?" And I think of that in advance so that I've kind of got that stamina. And I so wish I had done that, because all I thought was, I'm not taking the job. I'm not taking the job. I didn't think through what can I help her with? And that would have made my messaging so much stronger, because imagine me, what I did say was just, no, I don't.
No, thank you. Yeah.
No. What if I had been able to say, I know that the department needs this, this, and this. I am not a good match for these two things, but I can do all of these things. I can champion and support someone else in this role. And here are the ways I can support that person. I can build allyship for this person that we should have in this lead role. There were so many things I wish I had thought about from the message standpoint, because I think just saying no, could have hurt. It may have hurt my political standing with this director. Now, other people say that being honest about what you see as your strengths and weaknesses is definitely a credibility build. So my willingness to say, that's not a good role for me, it's not a good match to my talents, may have in some ways built my credibility. But I so wish I'd been more sensitive to what her needs were, what she was trying to accomplish, and had been more accommodating without, back to the pace. What am I not willing to sacrifice? I'm not willing to take that role, but what were the ways I could have helped her? Boy, Tatiana, if I had taken that approach, I think it would have gone a lot better.
So maybe if you had thought through, and this is why for our friends, we share this model. This is why we talk about, take time to think what's in your head, what's in their head. How are you choosing your channel for the message? Are you doing any pre-work? Is there feedback? What's the context? What's all of your timing with all of that? That's so very important. We have so many situational questions that I'm going to save my faux pas for the end, because, and if we don't get to your questions, by the way, we will respond to them on the feed. I'm not sure with Margarita's comment of exactly the context of all of this, but it sounds high stakes. I need to have a talk with someone who presents herself as individual hero, wants to champion the DEI topic alone as a white woman. How do I tell her that this isn't allyship, and for sure it isn't DEI? So I'm not sure if this is a situation or a topic or a training. And in the concept of you having to communicate, Margarita, with this person as the sender, I want you maybe to just, it sounds to me you're pretty mad at this person as it is, and that's already in your head. But be thinking of seeing this person as very, I would say, positive, or I would say very much wanting to help in this situation. So maybe she in the past has not helped and things have not gone right. So I'm just wanting you to kind of put that in your mind, that maybe she's coming from a good position of wanting to help. Now, you need to give her bad news that you perceive that I would like for you to think, is there any way she can help with this? Is there any way that she can be involved? Because from what I understand, you don't think that this should be covered alone by her only, but should be others involved. So I would think think of this empathetically for her, that maybe she comes from a place of wanting to help and have concern, and also be very strategic of what are you suggesting that she does versus not do.
Yeah.
Brenda, what would you say?
Well, I love the example. And the reason that I did was, remember on our model, we had that context is one of the things we must consider. And as soon as an issue involves race, it is a highly charged contextual piece then. And so we know that people are walking into this with some high emotions and some sensitivity, hopefully. So I think it was a great example of a high stakes conversation because of the context around it. And then, I would just echo what Tatiana was saying, in that we have to check our own filters and the filters of our listeners. And so anytime we can assume positive intent, that always leads these difficult conversations or these high stakes conversations in a better way. So if you assume only the best intentions are in her mind, that she's not trying to play the hero necessarily, but there's something else, something positive driving her desire to be the champion in this way. And just, even if it seems like, I have a friend who said, well, but what if that's naive? What if she is trying to be the hero? And the response is, well, assume positive intent anyway. You don't have anything to lose. And all you have to gain is a more collaborative dialogue with the person involved. And then the last suggestion that I would make is that frequently when we want to give criticism to someone, our criticism is actually a cover for a request, for something that we want. And if we can just skate past the criticism and get to the request, these conversations go so much better. So if instead of saying to her, I think you're approaching DEI incorrectly, I think you need to allow the people of color within our organization or our ethnic minorities to speak up on these issues, that's the criticism part. Jump right under. What is your request? You want her to share with people that have more knowing about the topic. Just jump right to the request and see how that goes.
Yeah. Well, you're talking a little bit about aligning on common values, and that's also thinking about what do you think is best for the organization and trying to align with them. And Angela brings up a point here, feedback on dealing with union negotiation conversations. We're in the university setting, and this hits a little close to home because our graduate students are really trying very hard to change the tide of the university as far as unions are concerned. So these are definitely high stakes conversations. And it sounds like Angela is giving feedback to someone about the way that they're negotiating, feedback on dealing with union negotiations. Again, what are the common goals and what is the intent of the outcome? If we can agree on that and have agreement on what we want to come through, then it's not feedback, it's a way to help the result be more positive. I'm not sure what the context is. Is this you telling a group of people, Angela? Is it a one-on-one? But I would start with, we both want this, or I am sure we agree on this. I would align on common goals and outcomes and values that you may have. And then you can say, I want to make sure that this goes well. And I would like to share with you some ideas that can help us proceed better too.
Yeah. I love that last piece, Tatiana, that this is, I think when we handle these high stakes conversations, a real good tool is to say, this is what I want to happen in this conversation. And sometimes and this is what I want to make sure doesn't happen in the conversation. And so by being that transparent and that vulnerable about what we hope to achieve and what we're worried might happen and we don't want to achieve, it just kind of opens the door for a more candid conversation. The one other thing, Angela, for you that I would keep in mind, back on our model, remember the very first consideration is, who is the sender? Sometimes we assume we're the best sender, but maybe not. Is there someone who is a little more credible with your union or your management group, whoever you're giving the feedback to, that if they have more credibility, they have more standing, maybe you allow them, encourage them to be the sender of a message with some feedback.
Yeah. We have a phase 2 from Margarita. I think I wish we could just interact, and this is when we bring learners in. She said, I'm not angry, but I want to be honest and clear on how this looks. And she says, I hear you. I believe she had the right intention, but the actions are not consistent because Margarita has offered to be part of this effort and the person has blown her off. This goes back to, remember what Brenda said, maybe you should not be the sender. Maybe, Margarita, the way you can be influential, go and talk to someone else that has some influence over this one person that is not acting in the way that helps the organization, and have that person send the message. So sometimes not always assuming that we are the best senders takes away the burden of the emotional, and obviously this is stirring you up enough to be bringing it up. It's definitely high stakes, but maybe is there someone else that could be communicating that message? That would be super helpful too. So we've got another one. I want to make sure, but by the way, we also brought up some good ones too. Giving feedback, how on high stakes conversations, giving critical feedback is so important, and we all avoid it, or many of us avoid it. And this is where it takes practice, it takes strategy, it takes making the mistakes so you can go back and doing this differently. I would say, just looking at the model with giving feedback, you have to make sure that that person doesn't have bad history with feedback, that they haven't been beaten up in the past and they're not defensive in this way, that you hold your best intentions in your hands and say, I want you to be successful. I find that that's the best way to do that. When you consider that you're the person to do this with critical feedback too. And also really timing is really important here too. What suggestions on critical feedback?
Can I share a story?
Yeah.
So because on the surface, it did not seem like this was going to be a high stakes conversation. But then as it kind of unfolded, I started recognizing, oh my gosh, this could really negatively impact relationships. So that's one of the things I just wanted to share with the group, that we could wander into these unknowingly. So here's the scenario. I was serving on a task force that needed to meet 6 to 10 times. And the only time all of us on the committee could find to meet was at lunch. So we had a little bit of a budget, and someone said, hey, to make it more tolerable that we have to do all these lunch meetings, let's order lunch in on those days. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. I love it. And one person on the task force said, I'll take care of arranging lunch. What a thoughtful thing, because nobody wants to get stuck with that burden of calling a caterer and making sure you got the right amount of food. Is it delivered? Just, bless her heart that she was willing to do that, right? So the first lunch arrives at our first lunch meeting, and it's pizza and soda, and that's it. And I'm looking around the room, and I know that a lot of us in the room watch what we eat pretty carefully. And I love pizza, don't get me wrong, but it is not a gift when you're watching what you eat. And there's somebody that I know has a gluten intolerance, and there's somebody with some dairy issues, and I'm like, oh no. And they both just politely said, I'll eat later, or I'm not hungry. And they didn't really confront the problem. And I'm
avoiding it. Yeah.
Avoiding, right? And I'm thinking, we have 6 more meetings or more. If we order pizza every time, it's kind of, it just didn't seem fair. So then I, in my mind, have to go through this process of, is it worth bringing up? Am I the right person to bring it up, since I can eat pizza?
Send the gluten-free person. Make it a safety issue. Make it a safety issue.
But that seemed unfair, right? Because that person is personally involved and didn't want to seem selfish. And that was the other piece. I think none of us wanted to do it because this person was so kind to offer to do it. We didn't want to look like we were being ungrateful for something that was so nice.
Yeah.
So giving critical feedback, how do you message it? Who should be the sender? When is the right timing? Is it right now while we're all staring at the pizza a little disappointed, or is it right before our colleague places the next order?
Yeah. Yeah.
All of that came into play with this.
Timing is so important. You're
And
so
it's
right.
just selling pizza, and yet I didn't want to jeopardize an important working collegial relationship over something as inconsequential as pizza.
Yeah.
But not inconsequential because it matters.
I want to bring up what Jay said, and this is so much from the heart. Jay, we've never met, but I get the sense from our conversations that you definitely are so thoughtful for this. And he says, I wish that in a dream world, people should be driven by the desire to help others. And we wouldn't have high stakes conversations. I agree. Remember, we said when power is involved, when egos are involved, when emotion is involved, and all of that doesn't say we're all on the same boat, but it helps to then think of timing, and it also helps to think of what are we here to accomplish together. And maybe you can guide. I would say maybe you only think this, Jay, but maybe you can start by saying, I know when I came to this organization, I want to see this. I wonder what you're thinking. Try to find the common ground in starting that conversation. That is so important. I want to say here again, so much interaction. Our friend here says how to control the emotional brain drain during such conversations in case the other person is aggressive or abusive. And that to me says that you've had other interactions, and it's hard to have a high stakes conversation when you've had experiences that make you, as the sender of a message, guarded and I would say defensive, right? Wouldn't you think, Brenda?
Potentially, but I think there's also a place where it's fine for you to have a boundary. If someone is yelling, if someone is using language that is offensive to you, I think it's okay to do a gentle, this conversation is not productive when you use this language, or this conversation is not productive when your volume is so high, or even use I language for that. I am having a hard time listening when you use those words to describe me. I am having a hard time being a good opener, a good listener while you're yelling. I think there are de-escalation strategies you can use when someone is being aggressive. You can ask them to sit down. When you physically come down, sometimes that emotional level comes down. I think there are opportunities to take a time out and say, I want to have this conversation, but I think we both have some high emotions right now. Can we reschedule for 3:00 this afternoon and come back to it? So I don't think that you need to assume that you have to be passive in the face of aggressive or abusive behavior. Absolutely not. You have your own bill of rights when it comes to what you're willing to engage with.
And maybe for our learner, this is a time to just put something in writing and not have a face-to-face. If there's something you need to say, be pretty direct. Again, think of the timing of what is that you go. And in this situation, if the person you think is going to become aggressive, I would do a lot of role play and ask your colleague to play that role so you can feel comfortable saying, this is not working. I'm going to walk away now and we can talk about this later because I don't see us being aligned, and the way that you're speaking is not appropriate. So you need
at least once a month, Tatiana and I have a phone call where we role play for each other because we know we're stepping into a high stakes conversation. I'm like, okay, just role play this out with me because I want to be able to anticipate what kinds of questions or comments I might hear, and I want to be able to modulate my own tone of voice and my own language choices as we're going through this. And it's so helpful to practice with a safe person.
Practice. It sounds like Ravindra has to practice too, because the person is always emotionally charged. Again, take some time, try to think what is in this person's life or past, or what is it that turns them into that. A little bit of that empathy and trying to see it from their viewpoint to understand it. It doesn't help make them less emotionally charged, but trying to understand it, I would say practice. If you think already he's a toxic decision maker, your filters are pretty much set in this way. I'm not sure maybe you are the person to give this message. Maybe a group of you gives this message. Maybe you figure out a superior to them gives this message, and then pick your battles. I mean, these are people I hopefully don't want to be around too many of them. I can create my situation not having to deal with them as much. But if you can not have to face this as much, if you do, I would say, like I mentioned to our previous learner, is maybe consider crafting a well-written message that you don't have to, maybe they will receive it a little better too. I'm looking for more comments, and we're not short on comments.
And one more tip on that one. I think paraphrasing is a very underutilized but incredibly powerful communication tool, especially for people who are emotionally charged. In fact, the way our brain works is that when we're in that emotional side of our brain, if you just say to me, now, Brenda, calm down, let's be logical.
Calm down, yeah.
I can't switch to the logical side as long as that emotional stage is still ramped up. One of the ways you can help me make that switch, instead of telling me to calm down, which I'm not going to calm down if you tell me that, instead, you paraphrase back. If you summarize in your own words what you heard me saying, sometimes I go, okay, he's hearing me. And that helps me de-escalate. Okay, he's hearing me. Someone know, and in your summary, you're capturing not just what I said from a content perspective, but how I feel about it. So if this person is emotionally charged up, you might say, I'm hearing that you're really angry that X, Y, and Z happened. And that might help them settle enough that they can switch to that more logical side and move on in the conversation with you.
And you're giving them feedback that, hey, I hear you, and this is, I know this sucks. This is exhaustive. One of our learners is saying that the more we do this honest feedback, the probably less emotionally charged these, because we're more used to it. A lot of this too is we're, for the most part, pretty feedback, I would say, conflict averse. So we're not having high stakes conversations. We let things bubble up, and then we do the cold shoulder. Like, I'm not going to talk to you because I'm mad at you. And then we have to go through the high school process of what's wrong, what did I do, which sounds like it's stuff that happens maybe in personal relationships, but it's true also in our working relationships too.
It'd be great.
Yes, the answer, yes.
Feedback cultures, right? Where it's just the culture to give feedback. And so it's not such a big deal when we have to do it. Yeah.
But again, the answer to your question, my friend, is yes, this is available. She's going to have a watching party and discussion. That would be fun.
Make some popcorn for the watch party.
Maybe there should be alcohol involved in one of those. But and Shelby responded to that. But I would like to say that the more we do it, and when there's trust, I want to bring back this model. And in the context, I would say, if the arms of a relationship that we wrap around with the other person or receiver are based on good intent, on trust and positive moving forward, if there's nothing that's been held from the past, trust is everything in building positive communications and lowering the stakes in some relationships too. I promised that I would share one of my stories where I didn't manage this well. And I would say it wraps everything that we have talked about. I, as a sender, went in a situation, I had just finished my MBA, and I kind of needed more. I wanted the next thing. And I was in a job where there was no next thing. And I went into a meeting proposing the next thing. So I wanted for the directors of this organization to create a different operation. It made a lot of sense. I went in with all my numbers and my data and the logic and why it was the right thing to do. For the organization, it was for a specific demographic that we would cater to. And I was very emotionally attached to my idea. I had done a terrible job, I would say, diplomatically fielding this. No one else had mentioned anything like this. There was no other influence from the outside. And I was really passionate about my idea and also emotionally charged, thinking that this would be a great next step move forward. And obviously, I did not, I would say I didn't populate the idea much. And I hadn't thought also what's going on in their heads. They were really trying to hold things together, and they were not ready for a growth stage too. So it was not perceived well. It was also the wrong time of the year that I did this, now that I look back. And the answer was a very strong no, to which I was, again, I was upset. But now that I think back, I probably didn't approach it well. I didn't influence the right way. It was high stakes for me. It was not a high stakes for them. It was a really easy no in that way specifically. So we're reaching the end of our time, and I want to say this is amazing. If we didn't get to your answers to your questions, we'll go on the feed and respond to them specifically. Our course that we talked about in the beginning not only talks about communication in everyday situations, but those high stakes situations, as Brenda said, when you have to say a big no, when you have to make a big ask, when you're making a pitch, and then a toolkit underneath each of them to help you build skills around that too. We really value the time that you took to be with us here today. Check out the course if you need to. Check out the Stronger newsletter that we have coming on, that is published and discusses some of this. And again, thank you so much for being with us from around the world. Take good care. Until next time.